introduction first and foremost, just to say hello to you all, and then we will then introduce you to Hannah, who will be doing the talk for us this afternoon. And we're looking forward to hearing from Hannah because I've already had a fabulous chat with her before this event, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from Hannah and what she does there at Nudge. So thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you're all quite familiar with Zoom. I think most of us have got used to it over the last 3 years. And yes, it is 3 years plus since we've been using Zoom, believe it or not. So the chat box, please introduce yourselves, put who you are and where you're from. If there's anybody in particular, again, we are a network. So if you want to put that in there and what you do and sort of your interests and things like that, please do that, so that we can obviously connect people up. There is obviously the private facility, so if you wanted to do that, that would be lovely. Thank you very much for that. Plus that means that Jess can also kind of tick you off on the list as well, so if we know your names and who you are, she can take you in like the teacher does at class. So Jess is on hand for us this afternoon. So Jess, if you just want to wave to everybody. So Jess is one of the Heritage Trust Network trainees, and I think our CEO David is also in the building, or in the physical bit, the virtual building, shall we say. So David is also around as well. But Jess is going to be on hand for any technical issues. So Jess is going to pop in the chat box now her email. So if you have any issues at all in the next hour and a half while we're online, please contact Jess. She has got her emails open and she will be able to assist you as best she can with any technical issues that you have here on Zoom this afternoon. So as I say, if you do have any issues at all, please just get in touch with Jess. She will also be on hand if you do lose connectivity as well. So if you do drop out, please just come straight back in, and just make sure that you kind of muted when you do so. So just the online etiquette. I know it's probably like sucking eggs, guys, because you're all used to it, but if you can remain muted throughout Hannah's presentation, that would be greatly appreciated, just so that we can give her the absolute most focus on what she's about to tell us throughout this next hour or so with her. If you have any questions or comments throughout Hannah's talk, please put those into the chat box. We will be relaying those back to Hannah at the end of the talk. So write those questions down so that you don't forget them. If you're anything like me, I forget them as soon as I think of them, so I scroll everything down. So pop those in the chat box. We will get those relayed back to Hannah. And if anybody's not very good with the chat box, we will also open discussions at the end with unmuting. So don't worry too much if you don't like using the chat box. We will unmute people. And as I said, as you joined us, there's no pressure for you to be on screen if you don't want to be. We won't be watching anybody sit there and fall asleep. So don't feel any pressure that you've got to be there on screen with us. So just a little introduction to this project that we are running with Heritage Trust Network. We've already been round 5 places in the UK to talk about rescuing, regenerating, rethinking, reusing high streets in our town centres. So we've visited those 5 places, and there's a picture from all of them. I know there's some familiar faces on here from there. We've even got some of our speakers on here. So thank you very much to anybody who came to the face-to-face events. We had some absolutely fascinating discussions. We learned a lot. I know I did, and David managed to sum everything up at the Reading event absolutely perfectly, I thought, throughout the whole thing. So thank you very much if anybody attended, but thank you very much for coming online, because the idea of being able to offer both is great so that we can reach as many people as we can in the regeneration world that we all work in at the moment. Now, some of you have ordered a series ticket, so thank you very much. We look forward to seeing your faces over the next few weeks. So if you haven't ordered that series ticket, it's better value to do that rather than individual talks. And those are the dates for the next ones, but we will send those out to you afterwards. But today, as I said, David summed up the regeneration series so far, the face-to-face events, very well. And one thing that I think we can honestly say is that things have not been helped by financial crises, Brexit, COVID, financial, energy, rising energy costs, all sorts of those sorts of things. But we are too quick to judge and blame one thing in this world today. It's been accelerated by these trends. But I think one of the speakers, Professor Stephen Millington, cautioned us not to talk about the death of the high street or even the crisis in the high street, but to talk about reinventing and rethinking, which is why we've called this series the way we have. So, as Steve Millington points out, we are facing definitely some new challenges with this new trend. So, this online series of talks will further strengthen those discussions, and we'll look at how people are reinventing our town centre and high street spaces. And one person that is doing that is Hannah, who we're going to hear from today. And Hannah is clearly passionate, and you will see that from her talk. And when I certainly learned that when I had a good chat with her a few months back. She's so passionate about making lasting change on the streets and disrupting systems that hold communities back. And the way she does it is very creative. So I'm looking forward to this talk from her today. So thank you very much. Me and Jess will be on hand at the back if you need us. Any issues at all, please pop those in the chat box, everybody. But Hannah, can I pass over to you, please, for this interesting talk, please?
Okay, yeah. Hi everyone. So I'm Hannah. I'm co-director of Community Builders. I've got lots of photos to share with you today, so hopefully there won't be too many people falling asleep. I'll try and keep it interesting and lively, and then really looking forward to having a bit of a discussion and answering your questions after that. So let me just bring my slides up so that you can have a look. These hopefully there we go. Is that all working? Can you see that?
Perfect. Thanks, Hannah.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so we're a community benefit society and we're based on Union Street in Plymouth. This is the street, but not how you would see it every day. It's a major high street into the city centre. It was called Union Street because it joined the three towns. Before Plymouth was a city, it was classed as three towns, and Union Street brought those three towns together. And so rooted in its history right back to the early 1800s is that idea of connecting communities and bringing people together, which is something that we've really played on. So what I thought I'd do today is just give you a bit of an introduction about where we've come from, because it really kind of cements a lot of our values and the ways that we work now, so you can kind of see where that comes from. And then I'm going to sort of tune into some of the key buildings along the street and talk about some of the risks we've taken and some of the kind of creative ways that we're bringing those buildings back into use. And then finally touch on the really gripping area, but I think is absolutely essential, around governance and how you can be creative and risk-taking through governance. So hopefully some of that will connect with all of you, and I hope that yeah, it kind of inspires you and gets you thinking differently about some of the things that you're doing as well. So the way we started, we're a group of residents and we were frustrated with the street. 25% of these buildings were standing empty. It's a conservation area and it's well known locally for antisocial behaviour, and a lot of complex issues play out on the street. We were really stuck as a community organisation. So we weren't Nudge at that time, we were a residents group, and we didn't have any budgets, and we were trying to sort of figure out what we could do within our resources. And to cut a long story short, we started off with taking a bag of shopping out on the street and doing a bit of a party. And then the following year, after the police dared us, we closed Union Street for a street party, and this is one of the first street parties that we did. What happens at these street parties is everyone spills out onto the street and looks at the street really differently. So it moved people on from keeping their heads down and walking along the pavement and not looking up and trying to avoid the street as much as possible, to really questioning. So the main thing that we heard out on the street was, why are there so many empty buildings? Why don't they do something about the empty buildings? And gradually over time, we started to think, well, who are they that we're expecting to do something about these empty buildings? And also like, why don't we do something about them? So we gradually started to put different artwork up along the street and things like that. And then we started to get to know some of the landowners and understand why the buildings were standing empty. So this is the first building that we took on. It's been empty for 25 years. And on the left where you see Love Union Street, Love the Palace, that was a building that had burnt down. And so in hindsight, it was quite a complex site. We were really naive. We crowdfunded £10,000 to bring this building back into use. And this is where a lot of the things that we hold dear now, and we challenge consultants and people that we work with around sort of processes in particular. This is where we really experience this. So we call this Union Corner. The graphics that you can see on the front was very much our start of using creative ways to replay the history of the street. So all of the lettering is from theatres and cinemas that were along the street through the sort of early 1900s. And so we're really interested in how we can have a nod to the past, but use it in a way that connects with lots of different audiences, so in quite contemporary ways, and how we use photography and things like that. So that's our first site, and through that process, we had lots of challenges. So we had £10,000. There were a whole queue of people queuing up to tell us that we weren't going to be able to do it. And one of the biggest kind of illustrations of that was the frontage of the building. So if I go back, the bit with the heart, so this is a rag rug heart that local people made to put above the building before we knew we were going to take it on, actually, on this one, and which is now inside. So this frontage needed to come down, and we were told that we would have to pay like another cost £2,000 to close the road, and there was just like a whole load of different reasons why this shop frontage couldn't come down. In the end, after lots of advice, structural advice, all of that kind of stuff, we were like, right, okay, we're not going to be able to do this. We're going to have to give everybody their money back. But then we felt really sad about that, obviously, because that was kind of like a very fast end to this project. So we tried again. We kind of sort of galvanized ourselves and were like, let's try and find a different way. We got a professional to put together like a risk assessment, like a local builder that we knew. And in the end, we knocked down the shop fronts. This is Wendy, my co-director. We knocked down the shop front on a Sunday in 45 minutes with a sledgehammer, and then it was gone, and we could put up the new frontage. So this is one of those times where we started to unpick how risk sometimes needs to sit with the organisation. So everyone around you that's advising you are also calculating in sometimes huge amounts of money to manage the risk. And actually, if you're able to take that risk on as an organisation and to feel comfortable that you've managed it in a way that you feel you can stand up and say, actually, we assessed everything and we think that we took everything into account, you can start to manage risk in quite a different way, which starts to save money, save time, but also make things more possible, I guess. And that's something that we still kind of come across now. So we've developed our board to be a high risk taking board, and our favourite document in our organisation is our risk and benefit register. So like how you kind of balance your risks against the benefits and not doing it at all, which is quite often what can feel like it's the only answer. So this is Union Corner now. So you can see that we got the new shop front in. We've a lot of people were talking about how grey the area was. So we've really focused over the years on bringing colour and joy back into the street. And the area where the building burnt down is now a garden. And this fence that you can see around the outside, that all opens up when we have markets and things like that. And that's all about sort of managing a safe open space on a really, really busy A road, but in a way that is safe for kids and all of that kind of thing. So that was 6-7 years ago now, and we thought it was going to be a 1-year project. Never dreamed that it would lead to all the things that Nudge have done. So what we learned from this building was that, as well as all the social impact and all the lovely community things that started to happen in here, local people can hire it from £5 an hour if they want to try something. It's an area that's in the top 1% most disadvantaged in the country. So there's a lot of services and buildings that people are used to going to access help. And the main feedback locally was that they wanted a space where things felt possible, where there was hope, where they could try things, and it wasn't necessarily identified with that sort of service type of offer. And that's exactly what happens in Union Corner. Loads of different kind of creative stuff, music, all that kind of stuff happens. But what we did was we disrupted this corner. This was the main route in for county lines into Plymouth, and the blue shop that you can see just along the way was a gentleman's club, and we had lots of interesting conversations going in there, asking them to need to move their car, going through the dodgy curtain and stuff. That changed use, and so did the strip club just on the other side by the garden. And so the landowner that we worked with on this, we don't own this one, the landowner really benefited a huge amount and started to be able to rent buildings that he owns nearby to better uses and generate more income. And so that's where we really started to kind of see the relationship between what a community does to improve an area, and then how it can start to trigger gentrification and increases in values. And we just started to really question who is the main beneficiary to that stuff. And that's what led us on to our journey of ownership and setting up Nudge. And you can see, like, these are some of the activities that happen in the garden. So these are people making bunting for the street party. And you can see all of that lettering starts to play through everything that we do. So the visibility of what we do through all of the kind of creative stuff, as well as on our buildings, is really important. It builds up that sort of sense of identity and connectedness. And we know things are working when people are like, oh, are you the same people that do the street party, that run Union Corner, that do this activity and stuff? So that kind of, I guess you could call it branding, but it's sort of much more integrated into what we do rather than paying someone to sort of brand us as an organisation. It's very much at the heart, like that style and feel of what we're doing is as important as the buildings that we're bringing back into life. And this is the frontage through the street party, so really started to sort of shift how that part of the street felt. Then we have like monthly markets there as well. So you can see how, like, over the years it's kind of opened up more and more, and really sort of brought a different kind of life to that side. So absolutely worth the £10,000 and taking the risks at that early stage. And that's what we have played out all the way through Nudge. So we set up Nudge to be able to take ownership of this building, which is the Clipper, and it's literally 2 minutes down the street. So we're really focused on the street. 6,000 square metres of building was standing empty, and it was having a huge impact on the kind of antisocial behaviour that was happening, because a lot of the buildings were locked up and uncared for, and people's sense of safety and things like that. And I'm not saying that we have fixed all of that. It's still a real issue along the street, but we now have 25% of the buildings that were standing empty along the street. So we are making a significant impact on the street from that perspective. So this is the Clipper. It was standing empty for 5 years, and was really dodgy inside. But the approach that we took to changing this kind of echoed all of that learning that we had from Union Corner. But obviously we own this building, so the sort of investment that we were making was really different. Again, we looked for history and traces through the building to play out on the frontage. So this lovely mural was inside from the 1940s, and it's images of people in a pub further along the street. Lots of people recognise people and kind of claim them as their relatives and things like that. So we took the colours from that mural, and then we looked at the sort of original architecture of the street, and Folston was one of the main architects. So we took some of the patterns that Folston used a lot through his architecture that you can see played out along the street, and brought those two things together to create a more sort of contemporary version and take of that on the front of the clipper that you can see on the far side. So started to kind of again find ways to sort of celebrate the history of these buildings, but in a way that is really hopeful and forward thinking. I should say that none of these buildings are listed, so although it's a conservation area, so far we haven't, there's only one listed building on the street and we haven't acquired that one. So it does give us a lot more flexibility. So this is how the clipper feels at the front. We've got 2 homes above for single people. And again, that was about listening to things that we had at Union Corner and then playing them into this building. So men in a mental health group at Union Corner were saying that they are housed in a way where it makes it really difficult to have them to stay because they're in houses of multiple occupation. They don't have a private space for their children to stay overnight. And when we looked at all the legislation, we realised that there's a minimum size for 1-bedroom flats, but there's not a maximum. So above the ground floor area, we've got two flats that can be adapted so that people can have their children to stay, and that's enabled 7 children to stay with their parents that weren't able to before, and sort of build that connection and stuff. So again, it's really small, but by thinking in that way, we can start having those conversations, and we've sort of shared that story with all sorts of different people in the housing sector and sort of social work sector and things like that, and sort of playing those stories out in a different way so they become more visible is something that is really integral to what we do. And then on the ground floor, we support local business people. So at the moment, it's home to Plymouth Jolliffe Kitchen. This is lovely Mariam. So we wrap up all the bills into the rent and give her a really sort of safe and supportive environment to get her business off the ground. Mariam is a classic example of what's starting to happen in our buildings, where people are growing up along through the street. So she started at the Plot, which is one of our more recent buildings, and scaled out of there, and then was sort of ready to take on her own space. Wouldn't have been able to pull together a deposit, that kind of thing. So we were able to manage a lot of the risk around her. And so the kind of risk taking and risk management side of how we work isn't just about how we're doing the buildings, it's also about how we're running the buildings, and then how we pass that support on to people inside our spaces as well. And this is another example. So this is Kitty, who's now on our board. She got involved with us when she was 14 and started at the street market at Union Corner, and then grew into a space at the Clipper. She's now got a space at the Plot, and yeah, is on our board and picks up all sorts of different things. So it's kind of caring for those people's journeys through what we're doing, as well as the change that we're making. And then amongst that, we're still being really active on the street. So this is where we really hear all of the sort of important messages that we want to feed into our buildings, and it's definitely where we get our energy. So it's really hard. I'm sure lots of you will recognise when you're taking on big capital projects and things, it's like you can get lost in that whole project management process and the looking for the money and all of those kind of things. But actually, the interventions that are small and not expensive and quick are the ones that can fuel you up, but also demonstrate why things are needed and remind you and others about that as well. So then we went on to take on the plot, which is halfway between the Clipper and Union Corner. This was a whole different thing again. So this one was being run as a furniture shop. It had been abandoned for 5 years. They'd been burning furniture on the site next door and had created a huge fire and had basically left it full of dodgy stuff. So it was overrun by rats and all of that kind of thing. We do a lot of the work ourselves. So we bring volunteers in and are really interested in how we bring people in early into our buildings so that they can leave their mark. And I think it creates a different kind of heart, but it also chips away at some of the big budget stuff, because actually some of the more time consuming things can be done in a way that, yeah, reduces the bigger costs. So yeah, this is us ripping everything out, all the old carpets and things like that, starting to disrupt spaces. So this was a really tricky corner on the side of the plot where people were fly tipping all the time. And then we worked with Eleanor, local artist, to basically kind of paint a mural on that side. We started to put deck chairs out there and things like that. And ever since then, we haven't had any fly tipping or any issue with the bins. We only needed to do that a couple of times to really shift how that space felt. And for us, shift it like mentally as well, because it was just horrible outside the building. So all those small things just make such a huge difference. This is a picture of inside the plot. So we don't own this building. It's a partnership with the landowner. And as part of that partnership, we've got an agreement to develop the site next door where there was a fire. So we don't want to put too much investment inside the building. So what we've done is we've filled the building with sheds and greenhouses, which is why we called it the plot. So people take on the space that they need. This is home to 20 small businesses now. It's where I'm sitting. I'm sitting in one of the units. So a really kind of different way to bring people together and to activate the space. And at the back, we've got the food court, which is just trailers that we bought inside. We were going to put really fancy kitchens in here, but we took this on in December 2019, so just before the pandemic. And by bringing in the trailers the following summer, we were able to enable people to operate in this space independently, safely through the pandemic, to be able to deliver food and all of those things that were started to be allowed to happen in the summer. And then they've just stayed. So this is where Mariam grew up. So you can see this is, it's really makeshift. Lots of community people have kind of come in and made it a really special place to be, and really different for the street. And then in September 2020, we bought the Millennium Building. So this is a big 1930s cinema. This was the one that sort of we were always looking at in terms of being the main trigger on the street. It's huge. We bought it in partnership with a private company. So again, in terms of being brave and taking risks, what we're starting to look at along the street as we understand why buildings are standing empty and the complexity around that, and also like how to be able to acquire them. We're opening ourselves up to different ways of working. So we're not a charitable community benefits society. So we were able to enter into this partnership with Eat Work Art, who are a private company. We were both looking to buy the building from this guy in Jersey. So we were competing against each other, and we worked out who it was and got in touch with them and said, look, let's not send any more money to Jersey. Let's buy it together. And so that's been hard, not going to lie, like the whole kind of how to manage the governance, making sure that we're operating in a way that still means that we can attract grants and the support that we need to bring to the table. But equally, they're bringing 50% of the capital. And also bringing a different kind of experience and voice. So we sort of balance each other out at the moment, really. We're the kind of like real community voice, wanting volunteers in there, wanting to bring it to life in a similar way that we've done with our other buildings. They're much more focused on the sustainability and making sure that we value ourselves properly financially and all of those sorts of things. So we have lots of interesting discussions, not going to lie, but I think it's really interesting about how community organisations can start to work together with the private sector. I think this building is in a stronger place because of that. Either way, if they'd ended up buying it or us, or we'd ended up buying it, I think together it's got a more exciting future. This is inside, so there's a huge venue inside. This is the ceiling that was built in the 1930s. So it's got really like major heritage features, but again, it's not listed, so we can be a little bit more playful, I guess, around how we bring it back into use. But we're doing exactly the same in this building as we did in Union Corner. So bringing people in really early. Earlier this year, we had a series of events, awakening events, where people came in and experienced nights reflective of the whole history of the building. So cinema and live music, dance, and then also the kind of raves and nightclub scene as well. Not going to lie, we had a ton of sleepless nights about making all of that work and sort of picking our way through all of the red tape around it. But it felt really important to understand how the building could work and actually like how much investment was really needed. So we've had people queuing up around us about this building, about what we need to do to bring it back to life. And so it was really good to see actually what is possible now just within the current constraints of the building and how we might start to add to that rather than closing it up and sort of spending years raising money to bring it back into use and opening it and it all being perfect. What our community will experience is being part of that process and seeing that sort of iterative way, getting people excited around it as we go. There were huge structural issues through the front, and we had to get that sorted before we were able to do the awakening. And at some points it just felt horrendous. Like it was similar to Union Corner where people were like, no, you can't do this, like all of these kind of different sort of reasons, and we just kept on pushing through in terms of like saying, okay, well, like how can we do it, how can we make this work? And what was really lovely as we got close to it and we were like, oh my gosh, we might have to cancel, like obviously we wouldn't want anything happening where people weren't safe and we weren't making sure that like all the health and safety was sorted. These scaffolders turned up and an urgent work specialist, and they all had tickets for the rave night, and they were like, we're going to make this work, we'll do whatever it takes. They worked like all through the night and stuff to make sure that it was sorted. So it's all those kind of community connections as people sort of buy into what we're doing on the street, you find this sort of resource that you never really imagined was there. So that was tough, but yeah, we got there in the end. And then alongside that, there's really small things that we've done with this building. So we were getting a break-in every week, and we were already paying for like CCTV and a security company and all of that kind of stuff. And what worked best was just pasting up a really nice message saying, if you're thinking of breaking in, don't do that. Give us a ring and we'll show you around, because it was all like urban explorers and stuff like that that were breaking in. And since then, we haven't had a break-in. So again, it's all those little things that we've learned along the street that make a really big impact to bringing the buildings back into use. And then in terms of the finances, we've done 2 share offers. So we did a share offer for Millennium. This is some of the information around it. So we've got 595 community share investors across the Clipper and Millennium. Some people have invested in both. And that creates this gorgeous kind of collective buy-in. We don't do community share offers ahead of purchase. So our process is that we purchase buildings using short-term finance, kind of 12-month time finance. We try and get as much assurance around planning and things like that. And then we go out with our share offer. And we find that a better way to work because it means that we can negotiate on the market when we're trying to purchase, rather than sort of showing our hand by doing a share offer in advance. And you can be really confident that the people investing are you're actually going to be able to do the work that you say you're going to do. So that's a really important part to how we run. And then we've brought in some really early uses into Millennium as well. So this is Doghouse Boxing Gym. They were getting made homeless because the building that they were using was getting shut down. And so we were able to use part of the building for them for a little while, just to make sure that they could keep going. It actually worked in a really cool way. They really liked the edginess of it. So we talk a lot about like what is good enough, because you can get really focused on thinking that things need to be really well repaired and stuff like that, when actually quite often people can make really special things happen in a building without a huge amount of investment. So this was great for us. It brought in a little bit of income, but also it enabled 60 young people to carry on boxing when they wouldn't have done otherwise. And this is a picture of the Awakenings. And so the most recent building we bought is this one, which was like a long-term enforcement issue. And I guess as you sort of see this, I mean, we started in 2017 as a community benefit society. So we have grown really, really rapidly. On every kind of assessment, we probably show up that we're not viable. Most of these buildings are not viable. We talk a lot about how community organisations can be really held back by the amount of expectation, often from like funders and things like that, or the council, to be able to demonstrate that you're making essentially a non-viable building, often in an area with complete market failure, suddenly viable because a community organisation's taken it on. And that's just not how it is. But you can unpick them in a different way. And that's what we've started to kind of try and articulate a little bit more, that actually you can take on this risk. So the worst case scenario with these buildings is that we would put them back on the market. So really, and they're not going to get any lower in value because it's a pretty low value area. So we're able to sort of take that risk on, knowing that, like, you know, it's better than them sitting empty, or some of the other people that are starting to get interested in these buildings. So this one was a classic example of that, where there was another buyer who wanted to knock it down and board it up. And there was an overseas buyer that was looking at it for an investment site, so no intention of doing anything with it. So we fought really hard for this and lost it several times. But in the end, a local investor that had seen what we'd done with Millennium and the Clipper came forward and said, if you're ever doing anything else, just let me know. And I rang him up, and he put up all of the money for us to buy this building. So we bought it at £550,000. and at 3%, so a loan. He's savvy, he's a business person, but a very kind and patient 3%. He's absolutely bought into the change that we're making, and that enabled us to be a cash buyer. It also meant we were suddenly taken seriously by the people that were selling the building, so the agent and staff. We get a lot of judgment when we go in, even though we've got quite a track record now. We're still really judged as a bit too community and all of that, which I'll come on to later. But this was one of those classic examples. We had to take a man along with us to be taken seriously, which is pretty horrendous. Anyway, we got there in the end, and we bought it in September 2022. So yeah, just over a year ago now. And straight away went into the street party. So we decorated it and asked people to put ideas up for what they wanted to happen there. Again, its last use was nightclubs. So we don't, things like the community ownership fund and stuff like that are not open to us because a nightclub isn't seen as a community use, which I share everywhere in the hope to get that changed. And then we have portraits taken of lots of local people in our buildings and people that live in and around the street. So unlike a normal developer, the first thing we did was the front, and in a really simple way, and then had lots of conversations about what might happen in that building. So this is what it looked like a few weeks ago. I'm saying that because we had a fire the other day in one of those arches, so those arches don't look like that anymore. Yeah, so it's already made a significant change on the street. It's drawn out all of the history of this building. So we've been talking about all the different uses. The blue building was an undertaker's upstairs and a sweet shop downstairs. The green building was originally a coach factory. So we've been kind of pulling out all of the sort of stories and people's memories of the building and starting to develop the plans for the future. So this one, there's going to be housing on part of the site, and then indoor farming, so a mushroom farm and aeroponics and things like that are going to go into another part. So we're starting to sort of build that up. But again, using all of the sort of processes and ways of working that we've done in our other buildings. So volunteers are already in kind of collecting materials, making sure we repurpose materials and stuff like that. And then I kind of wanted to sort of talk about the fact that like a building is never done. So this is us revisiting Union Corner this year because we thought it was going to be a year project, and 7 years later we're still running it. So we reinvested in the garden, and I think sometimes through like renovation projects we can want to make everything perfect first time round, where actually we've found real value in going back and revisiting and adding to and learning from what's working, rather than trying to make all of that investment up front and making it beautiful. Well, it's beautiful in different ways, I guess. And keeping up all the little things. This was on Kindness Day earlier this year, where we just hid little presents around the street. So we're a small team of 6 people now. We've scaled quite rapidly. We started off as 2, just me and Wendy, and we can get lost in all of the bigness of stuff and all of the possibilities along the street, but also all of the really tough stuff that happens along the street. So again, like keeping up on all of these really small, simple things. This was just some fly poster and a photography project that someone did, can make as big a difference as some of the buildings. And then, yeah, I just wanted to finish off with a little bit about our governance. This is our AGM. Our AGM is like the most important bit of the year, and we welcome in a really broad range of people from our community. And so we don't host it as a standard meeting. It's like a market where you can go from store to store. If you're a member, you can vote on things, but otherwise you can find out all about how our finance works. Or this is Mary and Kitty doing their stores, so as part of the board. So each board member sits on one of these stalls. And it's just a really nice way of breaking down some of the complex stuff rather than sitting in a meeting and having to take in lots of information. I think it's more accessible for people that might not have might not be used to sitting in meetings or feel comfortable speaking in meetings. It means that they can get really in depth into how we're working and what we're doing much more quickly. And then this year, I thought this might resonate with some of you. So this year, we put out some of the phrases that people have used either about us or quite a lot of them to us. So we've had, "You're just two women," "You've started this so you can get the professionals in," "You're a bit naive," "Is it proper?" All of that kind of stuff. And I'd been just noting them in the back of my book because it is really hard as communities. I think that we are judged all the time, even sometimes by people that we're paying to come in and do work for us. And so I've just been noting all those things down. And at the AGM this year, we put them all up. And it was amazing, the conversations that happened around that and how suddenly that wasn't a weight that we were carrying as individuals, and it wasn't the things that you'd think about when you wake up at night worrying about whether you're doing things in the right way or doing them well enough. They were suddenly out there, and then someone in the audience wrote a beautiful poem about how naivety can be a secret power and stuff, which was was really lovely. And then on the other side, you can see the statements that we're starting to pull out around our process. So we're trying to draw them out so that they become more visible, but also that it becomes more credible when we're talking about how we're working, because we tend to just go, "Oh yeah, we just do this," and then we like have some volunteers doing this, when actually it's a very different way of working. And the architects and specialists that we've worked with, as they get to know us, start to understand that around how we're working differently. So I thought I'd leave you with this one, which is some little aliens that we hid along the street, which again is a kind of just a little intervention that makes the street feel friendlier and more welcoming. I hope that that's given you some things to think about. I'd really love to see if there's any questions or anything that anyone would like to talk through further.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Hannah. I can see big smiles on people's faces at certain points of that. I know some of those elements made me laugh. Kind of, the innovative ways you're doing things. It's absolutely marvelous. So we've had, I think everybody was so kind of watching you with interest and listening to you. So there's no questions actually in the chat box. So I'm just going to open it up, I think, and just say to anybody, does anybody have any comments to make? Any questions for Hannah? Either pop your hand up first or just go for it and unmute yourselves. Any questions or comments? Marie?
I thought I'd just start the ball rolling, really. Hannah, that was absolutely brilliant. And congratulations to you and everybody for what you've achieved. It was so inspiring. Thank you for that. I'm just wondering if you can just tell us a little bit more about what that success has taken from you and your small team and now your larger team in terms of commitment and energy and creativity, and how you keep replenishing your own energy levels to keep going. Because I should imagine that a lot of people watching that say, oh yeah, you know, we could do that, but it takes a certain level of passion and a whole collection of skills and ambition and naivety, as you would say, coming together. You just say a little bit more about how much of your personality is in this.
Yeah, so it's not just me, obviously. So there's lots of us. I think we because we've grown from the street party, it has got that inherent creativity kind of making type element that we go back to, particularly when we're stressed and stuff like that. So like through the share offer, I crocheted like a whole shopping trolley. So that is my outlet. So some of that creativity is how me and Wendy deal with our stress. And it can be really counterintuitive when you know that you've got like, I don't know, like a huge funding bid to put in, but actually like you're busy crocheting or whatever. So there's definitely that. I think we manage some of the trickiness through that, and both of us as co-directors are fueled up by taking the time to like sit in the soup kitchen and things like that. So I think we both get our energy from being around people. I think we're both local, so we both literally like live like 2 minutes away. That's really hard because you're in the pub, you're in Lidl's, whatever. It's like the expectation and the accountability is really different. And I say this to the council a lot, especially. It's very different to a developer that can come in and make loads of promises. So that is probably the biggest way, I think, that accountability of making sure that what you say you're going to do, you do. But I think we try more and more. We're trying to make more of that visible, which was kind of what we were doing at the AGM. It's like, why are we holding all of this stuff and pretending that it's all going well and that it's all like a step-by-step process? Why don't we uncover some of that? So that is definitely something that we've been doing over the past couple of years that has really helped. It's a lot. It is a lot. And we've struggled to bring people around that that can kind of identify with those values as well. So yeah, it's tricky, but at the same time, it's better than what was here, which I think is kind of what we hold on to. So it's all of that, isn't it? It's kind of not holding yourself up to like too high a standards, and having a bit of a laugh through it as well as the other thing. I don't know, it's tricky. But yeah, it is just inherently hard, isn't it? Which I'm sure all of you will recognise as well.
Fabulous. Hopefully that answers your question, Marie. Thank you for that. Joanne, please.
Hi. Sorry, I can't find the little hand.
All right,
Right, I'm interested if you could tell us more about what is good enough. Because I mean, I work for a local authority. We've bought properties, and there's a kind of conflict in, you know, one side of the team saying it needs to be good enough, the assets team saying it needs to be perfect. So how do you deal with that side of things?
So we have different layers and then we test them out. So for example, in the plot, it was overrun by rats and there was a small area of asbestos and things like that. Those are like red lines. They need to be sorted out. But then off the back of that, we brought in a theatre company that just used it as is. So then we started to see, okay, like actually, like now that we've got rid of the rats and the asbestos, we can do a thing in here. And they did all of their risk assessments and things like that. So then we ended up with all of that stuff. So then we were again in a stronger position. So it's kind of like, and then off the back of that, we put all of the market brollies in here. So it's kind of that real sort of step-by-step process of like taking a small risk and thinking like, okay, well that happened, all right. And then the next bit is like market bits, and then it's like, okay, then we bought a greenhouse and put it in. So it's not like a clear process, but it's kind of those tiny steps of building up the confidence of people around you, I guess, that things are all right. Another thing that we put, obviously we do like insurance and stuff like that. So there's things that we do very early on that are like just need to happen. But then after that, I think most things can come, especially like we laugh at the photos, but I think that a community, if they're excited about it, can do a lot more with spaces than people can imagine, you know, just with like bits of tarpaulin and bunting and all of those sorts of things. But I get it. It's really hard to articulate that in a way that would resonate with someone in assets. Apart from sort of sharing examples and things like that, and a really strong risk assessment, I think, is probably the key thing. And that's kind of what we've been trying to sort of, so we're developing this mistress plan, which is an alternative master plan. So those statements that I put up at the AGM are what we're trying to unpick, is like to get a language around it that sounds as formal and as sorted out as the normal language. And I think it's that as well. It's kind of trying to find something where it sounds proper, so people can kind of acknowledge it, whether it's like phased development and stuff. The newspaper called us piecemeal, but we've kind of been reclaiming that. We've been like, actually, maybe piecemeal's good because it's better than like nothing happening. So yeah, definitely thinking about the language that you'd put around it. But I think it's that scaffolding on how can you be confident that like the basic risks are managed, and also how can you share the risk with people that are coming in to experience that building. Like when we had the raves, that was like definitely sleepless nights of like, how are we going to manage these drunk people and all of that in a empty building. That was like pretty hardcore, but they actually just so valued it because they had memories in there. So it was almost like a shared agreement with people. I think that's the other thing that we do quite a lot as people arrive, at sort of like those expectations. I don't know whether that answers your question, because it's really tricky. But I think that's what's interesting with these kind of conversations. I think organisations that are doing this sort of stuff need to team together more and demonstrate that there's a different way. We often kind of push against the REBA stages. REBA stages don't work for community organisations. They work for funders and for council and all of that. The people that are doing it, it doesn't work for them. We hop about the REBA stages all over the place. And so we're really interested in disrupting some of that stuff. I haven't got an actual answer.
I hope that's answered your question, Joanne. As you say though, Hannah, you know, you are restricted with local authority and things like that. Obviously, you kind of have to follow the guidelines, but at least it shows that pushing those boundaries and turning those negatives. I think that's one thing that I've learned from what you said, is that all the negatives, like people breaking in, you've just faced those head on and spun them. And I think that is quite a daring way of doing it, but it seems to have worked, which is fantastic. Wonderful. Next up is Charlotte. Charlotte, would you like to unmute yourself, please?
Hi, hello. I changed my name halfway through because I realised I was on as Grant's Business Improvement, which is not my name. Hello, I'm Charlie. I'm a Senior Communities Advisor at Historic England. And first of all, I think you've done some wonderful, really interesting things. What kind of caught my attention as you were going, given that today is the day that we're launching the Heritage at Risk Register, is the statement that, there's only one listed building on the street and we haven't gone near it. Is there a reason that you would avoid listed buildings? And is it what we all anticipate it to be, which is the kind of logistical concerns around listed buildings? Or is it just that you haven't come across a listed building that needs the kind of treatment that you would want to provide?
So there is a major listed building on the street. It's the most important building. When we first did the street party, that was the building. We were like, right, let's get around this building. It's the one that everyone asks, why is nothing happening to it? the ownership is just really complex. So it's really high up on the Fietas at risk register, and the owner doesn't want to sell. He's really enmeshed to the building. He was put in prison for sort of drug related stuff that was happening in the building, and he'll only sell it to someone that can clear his name, which is kind of impossible. So really, I think the only route will be compulsory purchase, and we've quizzed people about that. But the issue is having an organisation with enough capital in it to de-risk that for the council. So I think they're open to the compulsory purchase option, but there's not been someone with enough money ready. And for us, what we found is once you acquire a building, then all the funding unlocks and you can start to borrow in different ways and things like that. To demonstrate that you can do that ahead of a compulsory purchase order is really, really hard. And so, yeah, it's absolutely on our radar, but it's the toughest, it's one of the toughest ones. So we do get involved with conversations nationally about how compulsory purchase orders could work differently. We're really into how that could happen, because there's a number of buildings along the street that would benefit from that, and also sort of how the finances might sit around that. So we're looking at like an alternative form of land bank. So people like the person that helped us to buy C103, the building last year, it's like, actually, could we start to build up a fund that could then demonstrate that if the council compulsory purchased this and there was a back-to-back transfer, we'd be able to be in a position to take that on in a way that's not likely to go wrong and pass that sort of issue back to the council. So we're just sort of setting up the governance around that at the moment. Yeah, so it's not through wanting to do it, I guess. It's just that it's not one that is within reach. None of the buildings along the street were owned by the council, so they're all in complex private ownership.
That's so interesting, and it's really, really heartening to hear that actually it's a logistical acquisition issue as opposed to a problem around managing the expectations in listed buildings, because those are two separate issues that exist. So it's quite nice to hear that you would still be prepared to barrel in and go for it with a listed building if you could physically get over what is clearly a very complicated ownership issue that I've not the most dramatic thing I've heard so far. So
there's lots of stories along this street, not gonna lie. It's like, yeah, it's like you couldn't make them up, honestly. It's funny.
Thank you, Hannah.
Fabulous, thank you. I think you need to write a book on those stories by the sounds of it, Hannah, because they sound quite juicy. So yes, wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question, Charlotte. Now on to Claire, please.
Thanks. Well, thanks both Hannahs. Thanks, Hannah. Thank you also, Hannah, for what was a really brilliant and inspiring talk. Thank you so much for that. But and it may be that you've already answered this question a little bit in your response to Joanne. So apologies if I'm making you repeat yourself. But I also work for a local authority, which tends to be a very risk-averse local authority. I mean, as most do, but in particularly kind of risk-averse local authority, and with a community in the area in particular I work that's often quite negative about the place and negative about any work that we might do in way of regeneration. There's almost like that block, and that feeds into the risk of the local authority. And I just wondered kind of, what your top tips, what your advice would be of kind of how to sort of work in overcoming that, when you've got a risk adverse local authority, particularly our risk averse councillors, who are understandably very clued into to the public perception, and almost part of the risk that we struggle with overcoming is getting the authority to move beyond what the public perception is to what it could be. And obviously that seems to be something that you've done really successfully in terms of turning around attitudes about the street. And I just wondered if you had any kind of top tips for how you've managed that.
I guess it's interesting, isn't it? Because we so I was working in the planning department when we started the street party, so I know it from both sides. So I know how tricky it is. But I guess the key thing was like who they are. When people were saying why don't they do anything about these empty buildings, that's kind of implied that it's the council. And so there's been, it's taken a while, but that sort of shift in terms of the expectations of it being a council that fixes something, the ability for a community to kind of come together and do that themselves, because we've had relatively little support from the council, really. So most of our funding has come external. We've borrowed some money from the council and then paid it back. But other than that, you know, they have struggled with us because we fall between economic development and community. We don't quite fit in either. So they have struggled with how to deal with us, really. So yeah, I'm trying to think like whether there's a way of people in the community kind of seeing that actually that in that gap you can step up and find a different way if the council's not coming with the right solution. We really benefited from things like the School for Social Entrepreneurs early on and stuff like that. I'm wondering whether there's some people locally that might be interested in getting a bit more inspired and sort of skilled up around that to feel like they've got that agency. Because in Plymouth, because it's like, it's got a long history of like the defence industry, you know, the Marines, all of that kind of thing. There was a real issue around, and there still is really, about people looking for permission from elsewhere. And so the one of the things that we did was start to remove those layers of needing to ask for permission. So we had like public liability to do any kind of performance and kind of creative stuff out on the street, which meant we could say yes. So there might be something about removing, sort of creating that kind of permissiveness as well, like removing the barriers for people if they are wanting to do something, because that can be the real thing. The first time someone steps up to do something and then they're like, oh, have you got public liability and have you got this and have you got a risk assessment and all of that? I don't know whether there's something that you could do as a council to like remove some of those things to make it easier for people to step into that space, maybe.
Thanks. Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point, because we do have a number of community organisations who I work with who are they're either wanting to take on a building or wanting to find a space. And I did smile when, you know, you said you kind of sit between community and economic development. You know, I work largely on community projects. I sit in the economic development team, so I'm well used to that kind of butting of heads between the needs of both. But no, that was a really interesting point, and certainly I think well worth us looking into if there's something that we can do, as you say, just to kind of open the gates to our community and let them take the lead, rather than kind of, I think often there's this feeling with local authorities that, or certainly with the local authorities I've been involved in, that they kind of need to hold the reins on everything that's happening. And so it's great to have that input of actually sometimes it's far better just to let your community, you know, take the lead in what's best for them. So thank you very much for that. That was brilliant. Thanks.
Okay.
I did giggle actually with the risk assessment thing, because that was one of the things I wrote down when you said you took 45 minutes to knock the shop front down. I thought, I bet there wasn't a risk assessment to cover that one.
Yeah, there was definitely a risk assessment. Yeah, there was definitely a risk. Yeah, we are like, weirdly, risk assessments and risk registers are like our core thing, because we are high risk, like on every level, but then there's the risk of not doing it at all. So yeah, we do that, because once you've thought of the worst case scenario, like when we thought about the worst case scenario of knocking that shop front down, it really wasn't that bad. And once you've gone there, it's like you can work your way back, isn't it? It's like, I mean, we're talking about a wall that's like half my height. Do you know what I mean? It was not major. but everyone just made it out major.
Oh, good old, yes, let's exaggerate the situation sort of thing for a spin on it. So wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that question, Claire. Has anybody else got any comments or any questions for Hannah at all, please? Nobody's liking the chat box this afternoon, which is not a bad thing. So wonderful. Thank you very much then. So that's been absolutely brilliant. It's great to see. I know when we first spoke, I was amazed at the stuff that you were doing and pushing the boundaries. And it's nice as well to hear that it's two females. Sometimes it, as you say, it can be a challenging world, even for the men in the world, you know, but it's nice to hear that two females are going at it. And we've also got quite a few females on here this afternoon. So it's great to hear that in some ways females are leading the regeneration world a little. So brilliant. Thank you so much for doing this today for us, Hannah. We've greatly appreciated. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And as I say, please.